You're recording, right? Good. And let's share the screen. And let us go. Right. Okay. And okay. So hopefully everybody can see the screen okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Could somebody just put in the chat box that you can see the screen okay and that you can hear me okay? That would be helpful because I don't get a notification of comments. Good, thank you very much indeed. Obviously all your microphones are muted. So if you want to ask a question at any point, just unmute it or put it in the chat box. And then I'll stop at sort of the midway point for some questions. But if there is anything in the interim, please feel free to ask. So we've got some new guests with us today that haven't been to any of the webcasts previously. So welcome to everybody that's recently joined. The session is, as always, pretty informal. So feel free to butt in and ask questions as we go through. As I said, today we're going to be talking about the RICS rules of conduct. To give you a little bit of context and a little bit of background to this, there is this suggestion that the rules of conduct, if you get a question wrong on the rules of conduct, you'll automatically be referred. Now, whilst that isn't strictly true, there is an element of truth to that. And by that, what I mean is that we are told that the candidates have to get the rules of conduct questions right. But as with everything to do with the APC final assessment, there is a little bit of leniency depending on what sort of questions asked. The thing about the rules of conduct is two things. And they're two very, very key words, and they are common sense. So what I mean by that is that when we're asking the rules of conduct questions, so just for clarification, the rules of conduct questions come at the end of the interview, okay? They're asked by the panel chairman or chairperson, and they generally last for around 5 minutes. And within that 5 minutes, you can be expected to answer between 5 and 10 questions, okay? And so that is the final part of the interview. It always is at the end. It's always asked by the chairman. You will always be asked questions. And the difference between the rules of conduct questions and the other questions is that generally, and I say generally because I can't speak for everybody, but generally speaking, you will be asked questions of a scenario-based or on a scenario basis. In other words, what would you do if? Can you give me an example of, rather than looking specifically at the examples in your summary of experience? Okay, so just think about the examples that you, I mean, I appreciate that some of you haven't yet done your summary of experience, but a lot of it is quite general. So I have an understanding of the Bribery Act. I have we have a gift policy. I have an understanding of the ethical standards, etc. But you haven't necessarily given examples of how you've adhered to them, or what you've actually done, or when you've been bribed, or when you might have received an offer of hospitality that would be deemed inappropriate. So the difference between the questions on rules of conduct, as I said, is that it requires a little bit more brain power, a little bit more thinking outside the box. What should I say here? Not what do I do in practice? Okay, because that's not always the right thing to say. So sometimes you just need to sit back and listen to the question and try to establish, what are they asking me? So a little bit of an inside tip for you. One of the questions that I often ask, okay, is designed not to receive an answer. In other words, I might ask you, So assuming you're successful today and you decide to leave your own practice, decide to set up your own practice, and one of the first instructions that you receive is to value a high-profile hotel on Park Lane, London. What an exciting instruction. It's an existing client. They want to help you out. They want to give you a nice instruction to get going. But you're not a valuer. You're only level 2 valuation. And certainly you've had no experience of hotel valuations. What do? The question, my friends, is not asking about hotel valuations. It's about testing whether or not you would have the professionalism to say, thank you very much indeed for the instruction, but that would be outside of my area of expertise, my competency. Therefore, I would have to decline it. And I would recommend that the client seek professional advice, perhaps from a hotel valuation specialist. And if they're unaware of one, I would refer them to the RICS. So not every question, my friends, actually requires an answer. Think about what the examiner is asking you before you just dive into answering the question. All right. So where does this all begin? Level 1, the importance of professional ethics. Ladies and gents, if you have your microphone on, if you wouldn't mind muting it, that would be great. Thank you. The importance of professional ethics. Professional ethics are important because they act as an anchor to appropriate behaviors. They ensure consistency and clarity irrespective of changing factors, such as the state of the economy or business practices in different marketplaces. For our members, this means doing the best for your client, but in doing so, recognizing and respecting the wider public interest. Now, this is an important thing, particularly at this moment in time. We talk about the state of the economy. We talk about business practices in different marketplaces. The meaning behind that statement is simply that no matter what is going on in the world, and let's face it, quite a lot is going on in the world at the moment, that the ethical standards as provided by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors does not change. It is not malleable. It's not flexible. It doesn't change with whether we're in a boom economy or in a recessionary economy. Those are the standards that we have to adhere to. And that is the basis upon which the public trust us as chartered surveyors. It's exactly the same as the Law Society. Okay, they look after, they monitor, they administer solicitors and barristers, I guess. Okay, and that is why we know that we can trust, hopefully anyway, our solicitors or our barristers. Okay, because there's a professional body that gives them a set of rules to follow. Our members want to show that they're acting and behaving ethically for their own benefit, but they'll also want to show that they're doing so to promote the profession as a whole. The behavior of a single member can bring the whole profession into disrepute. Now, some of you may remember that, well, I can't even remember how long ago it was, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, there was a story of a valuer, and I can't remember which firm it was, one of the big firms, that was effectively taking bribes, okay? So the valuations that were done were negligent, valuing way too high so that the borrower could borrow a significantly higher amount loan to value, and then there'd be a bit skimmed off the top for the valuer, and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of press about it. Obviously, there was criminal charges brought, and so on and so forth. But that action by one single member actually had a massive impact on the whole of the profession. Okay, and that level of trust. Now, for those of you that do valuations, of which I know that quite a lot of you do, I'm sure that you will have at some point had some sort of request from somebody, you know, we need to get to. Maybe it's not, could you make it a bit higher or a bit lower, but we need to get to this number. Can you make sure we get to that number? You know, otherwise my client's not going to buy the property, or otherwise I'm not going to be able to buy the property because I can't get the loan to value. And the basis upon which the ethical standards are based is simply that that's the value. And if you don't like it, it's tough. Okay. Now we talk about the ethical standards. We have, and the ethical standards are split into two. We have the ethical standards for members, and we have the ethical standards for firms. Okay. We're going to concentrate primarily this morning on the ethical standards for members, because that's what you're going to be assessed on. But it is also important that you do have an understanding of the ethical standards for firms as well, and we will deal with that. So these are the 5 professional and ethical standards. 1, act with integrity. Always provide a high standard of service. Act in a way which promotes trust in the profession. Treat others with respect and take responsibility. Now, don't just learn the list. When I say don't just learn it, that doesn't mean don't learn it, but don't just learn it. Because I, as a chairman and others, will very rarely ask for you just to list them. The reason is because with the ethical standards, perhaps more than anything else, I need to understand, or I need to be convinced that you actually understand what acting with integrity means. There's no point in you sitting in your interview going, I act with integrity. Okay, great. How'd you do that? No idea. Well, how do you know you're acting with integrity then? So therefore, the purpose of this section of the webcast is to go through and to give you some ideas that you can think about, oh, actually, yes, you know, that is how I act with integrity. I can use that, so that rather than just simply list those ethical standards, I can say, I act with integrity by doing the following. I provide a high standard of service by doing the following, etc., etc. Remember that this is not a memory test. This is not just a regurgitation of information. This is about you demonstrating your professionalism, your understanding, your knowledge, and how you apply all of that to these situations. Dealing with the first one, acting with integrity. Now, it's a very, very open, wide-ranging standard. I act with integrity. I'm trustworthy in all that I do. Well, what is being trustworthy? Being open and transparent in the way you work, sharing appropriate and necessary information with your clients and or others to conduct business, and doing so in a way so they can understand that information. Respecting confidential information of your clients and potential clients, not divulging information to others unless it's appropriate to do so. Now, you have information, okay, on your clients. Let's say, for example, that you're in an agency capacity and you've got a best bid scenario. So you're selling a building and there's a significant amount of interest and it's going to go to best bids. Great. And your friend phones you up. I'm really interested on behalf of a client, would like to buy this. I understand it's going to best bids. Can you help me? Can you text me the highest offer? And, you know, I'll take instructions and hopefully we can increase it. Now, this is what I was talking about right at the very beginning. The difference between what may happen, and I'm not casting aspersions. I certainly wouldn't do it. And what happens in the RICS interview room. Now, it may well be that you're keen to help your friend. Ultimately, you're going to achieve the best result for your client. So are you really doing anything wrong? You know, you text them, the highest offer is, I don't know, say 1.5 million. Are you actually doing anything wrong? If they come in at 1.55, you know, you've got another 50,000 for your client, they're very happy, you know, your friend's happy, maybe they'll reciprocate, etc., etc. But that is in breach of the ethical standards. That is not acting with integrity. That is breaching confidentiality, and that is not permitted. So therefore, use that if you're in that sort of doing that as a competency. Use that as an example, if it's appropriate. When dealing with informal tenders, I ensure that all information, all offers remain confidential. They are not disclosed to any parties. And should somebody request the highest bid or what others have bid, I will, of course, keep that confidential and not disclose it to a third party. But also, ladies and gents, please think, because I know you all come from sort of different backgrounds and you do different things. Just ask yourself, how do I respect confidential information? Okay. Now, we have some financiers. Okay. So you have a lot of information on your clients, personal information, corporate information. Again, the idea of confidentiality is very important. Not taking advantage of a client, a colleague, a third party, or anyone to whom you owe a duty of care. Not allowing bias, conflict of interest. That's a really, really important one. Or the undue influence of others to override your professional or business judgments and obligations. We'll come on to conflicts of interest in a lot more detail later, but just think about that for a second, okay? Your duty is to your client, but that doesn't mean that gives you free rein to do whatever you want in order to achieve the best result for your clients, okay? Make clear to all interested parties where a conflict of interest or even a potential conflict of interest arises between you or your employer and your client. Not offering or accepting gifts, hospitality, or services which might suggest an improper obligation. I'll come on to that again a bit later. And act consistently in the public interest when it comes to making decisions or providing advice. So therefore, ladies and gents, first ethical standard, act with integrity. Just think about some examples, jot them down. Okay, we don't have to discuss them because they're all personal to you. But in our mock interviews, when we get round to doing them, I'm going to ask you that. And I want you to come up with at least one, possibly two examples of how you act with integrity. Next. I provide a high standard of service. Well, of course you do. That's your job, isn't it? Always ensure your client or others to whom you have a professional responsibility receive the best possible advice, support, or performance of the terms of engagement you've agreed to. Be clear about what service your client wants and the service you're providing. Here is the crux. Act within your scope of competence. You cannot provide a high standard of service if you're acting without your sphere, if you're acting not within your scope of competence. Comes back to the example I gave you right at the very beginning about the hotel valuation. What a glamorous, what a prestigious instruction, what a big fee to get me started in my new business. But I'm acting outside my scope of competence. Providing a high standard of service is being able to meet the requirements of the client and the task. As an aside, just remember this because this is important. In the interview, when you're asked to talk through certain things, okay, when you're asked to talk about whatever the example is in your summary of experience, always begin with, I checked to make sure that I was competent. That comes before terms of engagement. It comes before conflict of interest. It comes before fees. It comes before anything else. Because, my friends, if you're not competent, you're not going to do any of those things. I checked to make sure that I was competent. Now, the follow-on question from that, which is not an easy question and it catches people out. Well, how do you know you're competent? And the answer is the Red Book gives a definition of competence. And it's basically, and you don't have to read it word for word or learn it verbatim, but it's basically having the knowledge and skills to undertake that instruction. And basically what it's saying is that if you've dealt with that type of property and you've been involved in that location and you've undertaken that task, i.e. a valuation, a rent review, a letting, whatever, then you're deemed as competent. So you've got to be able to do the task, you've got to know the location, and you've got to have been able to meet the requirements of the type of property that you're actually involved in. So that's how you act with your scope of competence. So again, example, how do I provide a high standard of service? I checked to make sure that I was competent. And an example of this is I was asked to deal with the dilapidations claim, or I was asked to deal with putting together a license for alterations. And I had to advise the client that I was not competent to do that. And I advised him to speak to a building surveyor or a property manager or whatever. Okay, I was not competent. Be transparent about fees and any other costs or payments such as referral fees or commissions. There are certain acts that deal specifically with this point. The Estate Agents Act of 1979, Section 18, deals with being the transparency about fees. And it basically says that before you undertake the role, you should clarify exactly what the fees are going to be, whether it's for a sale or an acquisition or a letting or an assignment or subletting or whatever, and whether there's any other fees or payments such as marketing costs, for example. If you're a managing agent, you may be due to receive commission for insurance, for example. Yeah, when you place insurance, you might get a kickback. I'm not sure if that's the technical term, but you know what I mean, from an insurance broker for placing a portfolio with that broker to get the insurance. And you'll have to, by providing a high standard of service and declaring it to the client, you're providing a high standard of service. Communicate with your client in a way which will allow them to make informed decisions. If you use the service of others, then ensure that you pay for those services within the timescale agreed, and encourage your firm or organization you work for to put the fair treatment of clients at the center of its business culture. Promoting trust in the profession. Act in a manner, both in your professional life and private life, to promote you, your firm, or the organization you work for in a professional and positive way. This standard includes, but isn't limited to, the following behaviors or actions. Promoting what you and the profession stand for, the highest standards globally. Understanding that being a professional is more than just about how you behave at work. It's also about how you behave in your private life. Understanding how your actions affect others and the environment, and if appropriate, questioning or amending that behavior. Fulfilling your obligations, doing what you say you will, and always trying to meet the spirit of your professional standards and not just the letter of those standards. Now, fulfilling your obligations is an interesting one, okay? And I want you to think back to this when we go through some questions. If you say you're going to do something, let's say, for example, that you're asked to carry out a task, a project, whatever it may be, and you quote for that job, and that quote is accepted by the client, and they sign terms of engagement, and you begin work, and you then realise that actually you've underestimated the amount of time that's going to go into this, and you have underquoted. Promoting trust in the profession means that you are not permitted to go back unless something emerges that wasn't disclosed to you, but you're not permitted to go back to the client and say, I'm terribly sorry, but I've underestimated the amount of time that this is going to take. I'm going to have to renegotiate the fees. You're not permitted to do that. That does not promote trust in the profession. Treating others with respect. Treat everyone with courtesy, politeness, and respect, and consider cultural sensitivities and business practices. Being courteous, polite, and considerate to clients. potential clients, and everyone else you come into contact with. Never discriminate against anyone for whatever reason. Always ensure that issues of race, gender, sexual orientation, age, size, religion, country of origin, or disability have no place in the way you deal with other people or do business. And as much as you're able, encourage the firm or organization you work for to put the fair and respectful treatment of clients at the center of its business culture. Now, of all of the ethical standards that you can select, this is the one I would least recommend you select. Okay, so in other words, if you're going to give examples of how you've adhered to the ethical standards, I wouldn't necessarily concentrate on this one because, to be honest with you, gentlemen and ladies, this is a pretty bloody obvious one. Okay, so if you have to prove that you don't discriminate against people, yeah, there are better examples you can give. Okay, I'm not saying that if you're going to list them out, don't include it. Of course, include it, but I wouldn't say that you should focus on it. This is an interesting one at the end. Taking responsibility. Be accountable for all your actions. Don't blame others if things go wrong. And if you suspect something isn't right, be prepared to take action. Always act with due skill, care, and diligence. If someone makes a complaint about something you've done, respond in an appropriate and professional manner. And aim to resolve the matter to the satisfaction of the complainant as far as you can. And if you think something isn't right, be prepared to question it and raise the matter as appropriate with your colleagues, within your firm or the organization that you work for, with the RICS, or with any other appropriate body or organization. Okay, so taking responsibility means that if you think somebody else has done something wrong, don't just ignore it. Okay, you're acting on behalf of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. You have a duty to make sure that everybody else meets those ethical standards, whether they are members or not, doesn't matter. So, just looking at the rules of conduct for firms. Excuse me, just one second. Whereas we have the ethical standards for members, we have the rules of conduct or the core values for firms. Now, the core values are proportionality, accountability, consistency, targeting, and transparency. I want to concentrate primarily on proportionality because this is something which, again, is often talked about, often comes up, but actually is not always fully understood. And it's in particular relation to gifts, the giving and receiving of gifts, and the impact of the Bribery Act of 2010. So a lot of people say in the interview, I had to consider whether the gift was proportional or not. What does proportional mean? I don't know. Well, how do you know if it's proportional then? And there is no sort of industry definition of proportionality, but what it essentially means is that you have a duty to consider whether or not the gift that you're being offered or the hospitality is appropriate for the work that you have undertaken or the business relationship you have undertaken with the party that is offering that gift or hospitality. And this is what I said right at the very outset about the common sense. Okay, so you're an agent, you've done a great job, a great deal for a client. You've acquired a building that they really wanted to buy. You've got a good price, done whatever you're supposed to do. Your company's been paid, and the client sends over a bottle of champagne, 20 quid bottle of champagne, just to you, just to say thank you very much for your efforts. Great working with you. Look forward to working with you again in the future. Is that acceptable? The answer is probably yes. Okay, that's proportional. you've done a good job for a client, they're an existing client, they're not seeking favor with you, they're thanking you for your efforts. They've already paid your fee, so it's not in lieu of cash. It's reciprocal. In other words, you could afford to reciprocate. So it's not of a value which would be considered as inappropriate, and therefore it would be considered as proportional. But if you turn it around the other way, let's say that you've got a client who is particularly keen to work with you and wants to invite you to a sporting event, get to know you a little bit better, and start developing a business relationship. There is a marked difference between, I don't know, let's say going to the test match for the day and going on a private jet to the Monaco Grand Prix and spending the day on a yacht. And incidentally, if anybody has a private jet and a yacht in the south of France, I'm quite willing to overlook the whole proportionality thing as a thank you for passing your APC when we can, of course. So therefore, that would be considered as not proportional. Okay, and we'll come on to the subject of gifts and proportionality again a little bit later. Now, next thing about rules of conduct. You are required as a chartered surveyor to have professional indemnity insurance. And if you've ever looked at the Modus magazine, or whatever it's called now, particularly at the disciplinary section, one of the most common reasons for somebody appearing before the disciplinary panel is not having indemnity insurance. So the purposes of having professional indemnity insurance are to ensure that if the firm faces a claim, it's protected from financial loss that it cannot meet from its own resources. It protects the insured, i.e. the member or the firm, against the consequences of its liability to pay damages to third parties in respect of breaches of professional duty that it commits in the course of its professional activities. And it ensures that the firm's clients don't suffer financial loss which the firm cannot meet. So just concentrating on that for a second. The insurance is there to protect both the insured, i.e. the member or the firm, but also the client. So let's say, for example, that you do a rent review for a client, and unfortunately you miss a vital piece of evidence, a vital piece of comparable evidence. And as a result of that, the uplift in rent is not as much as it should have been. This evidence comes to light post signing of the rent review memorandum. And the client is obviously not too happy, because not only have they lost the rent, but the capital value of their asset on the revaluation has also been damaged. And unfortunately, they decide to sue you and pursue you for damages. Now, in reality, what could happen is that a firm or an individual would be unlikely to be able to meet those damages, which could run into hundreds of thousands of pounds, perhaps even more. So therefore, what do? They liquidate the business, they go bankrupt, they close down the limited company, whatever. So who suffered? Well, the client has. They've got nobody to pursue because they've got no, the individual is, there's no personal guarantees or anything. So it's the client that has suffered the financial loss, which obviously is not very good. So as a result of that, that is why we have to have professional indemnity insurance to protect our clients. The minimum level of indemnity on an each and every claim basis is based on the firm's turnover, okay, not profit, turnover. Firms must have runoff cover. Firms must have cover for past and present directors, partners, members and employees and must have appropriate run-off cover for at least 6 years. Please note the minimum levels of indemnity. First, the firm's turnover in the preceding year, £100,000 or less, minimum level of indemnity was £250,000. 100,001 to 200,000 is £500,000, and 200,001 and above is £1 million. So I just touched a little earlier just on run-off cover. For anybody that has sold a business or moved on, closed a business or whatever, you will know that this run-off cover is a bit of a ball ache. It's expensive, and you have to question whether or not it's actually worth it. Of course you do, like any insurance. Well, it's not worth it unless you need it. The run-off cover is the insurance cover that's required after a member ceases to practice. Professional indemnity insurance operates on a claims-made basis. It's the policy in place at the time of the claim that is relevant, and not the policy that was in place when the negligent work was performed. That's important, okay? It's the policy in place at the time that the claim is made that's relevant, not when the negligent work was performed. As problems sometimes don't arise until much later, this type of insurance should be acquired. Essentially, cover is needed for at least 6 years after the member last carried out any work. That doesn't mean that this period marks the end of the member's liability, which can extend to a 15-year period. 15 years is what's recommended by the RICS, but it's not compulsory. If you do cease to practice, you should obtain specialist advice regarding your liability. It's a member's duty to ensure that any former sole principal, partner, director, employee or consultant of the firm continues to be insured by that firm on an each and every claim basis against any claim arising from work previously undertaken for a minimum period of 6 years from the date the member's employment with the firm ceased. Just bear with me just 1 second, I just need to close the window. Not as warm as it was yesterday. Okay. So now I'd like to talk about the next thing, which is the complaints handling procedure. One of the common questions at interview is, assuming you're successful today and you decide to set up in practice on your own, what are the necessary steps you'd have to undertake in order to do that? A firm must have a complaints handling procedure and maintain a complaints log. In the event of a complaint, the matter will be addressed to the complaints handling officer or a senior member of the firm. If the complaint cannot be resolved, then it can be referred to an independent third party. A copy of the CHP, Complaints Handling Procedure, should be provided with the firm's terms of engagement. The CHP is free to the claimant and must be dealt with within 28 days of receipt. So you should have at your company a complaints handling procedure. May I ask that you refer to it and ensure that you are familiar with it? If you haven't, please get one so that you can explain what it might contain. It can be relatively basic, relatively simple. It doesn't have to be a whole long brochure, but the purpose is that your clients know that there is somebody there that will deal with a complaint if it is being raised. Now, as a sole practitioner, you can be, bizarrely, your own complaints handling officer. But most, as a sole practitioner, will appoint a third party to step in and deal with that if appropriate. Those of you that are in property management, this may be relevant to you. The RICS makes it clear that it's a firm's responsibility to ensure that clients' money is handled correctly. Accounting systems and client data are securely controlled and protected. Client accounts must be named and have the word client in the name of the account. Client money should be available on demand and should always be in credit. Details of the accounts must be provided by the client. An agreement must be made in writing if the firm is to retain interest. A three-way reconciliation is completed once every month where the client's money is held in a general client account. Now, this is one of the main things actually about firms that are regulated. Obviously, some of you will work in regulated firms, others won't. I had a regulated firm many years ago, property management company, and we had an annual inspection by RICS. And it was interesting, actually, that we were asked to pitch for the management of a portfolio. And one of the questions that was asked of all of the companies that were being asked to pitch was, are you regulated by the RICS? And of course, we said yes. And you know, I gave some consideration to why was that question asked? And actually, it's pretty obvious why it was asked, because the handling clients' money bit is so vitally important. It's such an important part of the property manager's responsibility. So the RICS place a great emphasis on the systems, the procedures that each and every company has to handle clients' money correctly and legally. Now, companies do it in different ways. There are separate bank accounts. Sometimes it goes into a client account and then it gets separated out. I don't know. But the most important thing is that the client account must have the word client in the name of the account. And when we had these inspections, they would literally go through with a fine-tooth comb. Each and every client account, make sure that there's reconciliation, and everything had to be checked and double checked by myself as the business owner. So it was very, very, very stringent. But that is that is one of the most important things, because if you think about it, you know, the rent, which is the mainstay of a property investment, is going into somebody else's account. You know, when the property manager says to the client, "I'm terribly sorry, only 50% of the rents come in," well, you're trusting them that is actually the case. Now, at the moment, one might have one might be grateful if 50% of the rents come in, but that's a different matter. So ensure that you're familiar with handling clients' money. Next thing is CPD. The aim of CPD, don't forget that CPD is different once you've qualified. This is the CPD that you have to do once you've qualified. The aim of CPD is to improve your professional competence for your own benefit and that of your clients, employers, and others. Quality is as important as quantity. Now, you know, this is an interesting point about CPD. I cannot tell you how many people contact me in December or early January even to say, I've had a reminder from the RICS about my CPD requirements and I haven't done anything. Can I put down some of your courses? And I say, no, you can't. Which doesn't make me terribly popular, but let me ask you this, okay? You may have you had the services of a solicitor, an accountant, whoever, another professional. You're assuming that professional person is just that, a professional person. You know, if you went to your accountant and asked them to do your accounts, your personal income tax returns, you'd expect your accountant to be pretty up to speed with tax law regulations in the current market. Where do they get that information from? From CPD. So therefore, the imposition of CPD on the RICS members is really not such an onerous task, and yet nobody does it. That's a big failing of our industry. And, you know, it's 20 hours per year. And that's made up of professional work-based activities, personal, informal learning, voluntary or charity work, courses, seminars, conferences, mentoring, all of that sort of thing. 20 hours, guys. It's like 3 days. It's really not very much. RICS requires member CPD to be effective, enabling them to do their work competently. The outcome of the learning is as important as the number of hours spent on it. However, RICS would find it difficult to consider less than 20 hours learning activities to be appropriate amount of learning. Conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest is probably the most important section of the rules of conduct. Now, you will note that there are always updates, or if you don't note, I'm telling you, there are always updates to the professional standards and guidance, global conflicts of interest. The last one, I believe, I may be wrong, was the effective date of 1st of January 2018. May I suggest, and I will do so myself once we finish, may I suggest that you just go through, have a look at the RICS website, and just go onto the various, there is a section for sorry, there is a section due to on conflicts of interest. So may I suggest that you read that. Right. So this is the update. So it deals with the professional statement, conflicts of interest and confidentiality, what it contains, general commentary notes, etc. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'll let you read it, particularly the supporting commentary notes. Just before we do that, just give me 1 minute, please, while I just have a quick drink, because my throat's getting a bit dry. Just bear with me. Right, thank you. So turning back to conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest may occur where you or your firm are acting for another person with competing interests at the same time. For example, you're advising both the seller and buyer for single commercial property simultaneously. Have other obligations or pressures that detract from or affect your relationship with a client, for example, acting as an expert witness, where you or your firm has an interest in the outcome of the proceedings. Are faced with conflicting duties owed to different clients, for example, acting for 2 or more parties, competing for an opportunity. And I'll come on to that in the last bit in just 1 second. I just want to go through these. You know, a lot of people consider the conflicts of interest as being acting for two parties, particularly in an agency capacity, or acting for the buyer and the seller. Okay, and that's not always the case. And the first thing that you've got to be aware of, ladies and gentlemen, is that you need to ensure that you identify before it becomes a problem that there may be a conflict of interest. So look at the first one, acting for another person with competing interests at the same time. So therefore, advising both the seller and buyer of a single commercial property simultaneously. So let me ask those, because we have some friends from some of the big firms. Welcome. This is particularly directed at you because, and I've asked this question when I've assessed your colleagues, how do you deal with that when such a worldwide organization, you know, for example, your Birmingham office may be selling a building and the London office has a client that would be buying it. So what do? Do you walk away from it and say, like, oh, sorry, we can't buy it because there's a conflict? Do you take a fee from both sides? What do you do? Ask yourself that question. You know, there isn't an easy answer. I know what happens in real life, but you cannot take a fee from both sides. It's known as double dipping. Okay, so how do you deal with it? You have other obligations or pressures that detract from or affect your relationship with the client. Remember that a conflict of interest, okay, is not necessarily taking fees from both sides, but it's where you are unable to offer the best advice to that client. So, for example, let's say you're doing a lease renewal and you happen to be an expert in retail leasing in Bond Street, and there's a lease renewal of the Louis Vuitton on Bond Street, and it goes to third party, and the RICS appoint you as the expert witness. Sorry, the court rather goes to court. The court appoint you. They don't know as the expert witness. Now, of course, you can't be the expert witness in a case where you're acting for one of the parties. That's a conflict of interest. Or you're faced with conflicting duties owed to different clients. Now, how many times, you can be honest, have you offered an investment opportunity or a leasing opportunity to more than one party? I'll offer it to client A and client B and client C, just in case. If client A doesn't buy it, well, client B definitely will. Client A comes back, yep, love it, let's go for it. Client B comes back, yep, absolutely love it, let's go for it. And then you think, now I've got a bit of a problem. That's a conflict of interest. Hence, you are only permitted to offer one opportunity to one client. Now, a common question that's often asked is, well, how do you carry out a conflict of interest check? Everyone says, you know, when they talk about their processes, I carried out a conflict of interest check. That's great. Well, how did you do that? Now, somebody got themselves in a terrible state at the last round of interviews. Why? Because he said to me, this is the absolute truth. He said to me, yeah, we carried out a conflict of interest check. Okay, great. And how exactly did you do that? Well, I sent an email round the whole company. Okay, fine. And then what? I waited for everybody to come back to me. It was then established that there was no conflict of interest, so I proceeded with the instruction. So I said, and this is in the interview, I said, do you mean to tell me that a company of your size, and I know the company, there's probably 600 members there, sorry, 600 staff. I said, do you mean to tell me that you waited for all 600 staff to email you back to say, yeah, there's no conflict before you did anything? I said, bollocks, you did. I didn't say that in the interview, obviously, but I thought that. I said, it's not logical. You know, what happens if someone's on holiday? What do? Wait 2 weeks until they come back from Barbados? Actually, this firm wouldn't be sending anybody to Barbados, but that's a different matter. I said, but you know, think logically. So ask yourself, if you're gonna give that answer in your interview, I carry out a conflict of interest check. Great. Well, how do you do that? Do you send? Do you have a database? Do you have an internal system where you can check? Remember, let me just take my RICS hat off for a second. Remember that the RICS don't know what you've got internally. So if you have an internal system, okay, then that's what you're going to use. Okay, now that internal system could be called whatever you want it to be called. It might just be a simple Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter. Okay, but that's how you do it. Now, obviously, if you work in a small firm and there's 4 of you, you know, you can shout across the other room. Is there any reason why we can't do this? But let me ask you this, ladies and gents. How many of you really ever carry out a conflict of interest check? Probably not many. So before taking on a new client or undertaking new work, you should ask yourself, whether your ability to act in the best interest of your client could potentially be impaired by financial interest. So if you, let's say, for example, I'll give you a great example. Many years ago, and I don't think it happens now, but I'm not really in the market. But many years ago, developers would offer agents an incentive fee if they acquired space within their office building over and above what they would be getting from their own clients. So, for example, you know, and it was actually fully openly disclosed. You know, in the event of your client taking, say, you know, one of the floors, 5,000 square feet or whatever, a payment of £5,000 or 10% of the rent will be paid to the acquiring agent. Now, all of a sudden, what was happening was that agents who were instructed to seek offices were suddenly directing, surprisingly enough, their clients to this particular property. Oh, look, it's wonderful. You know, look at this. Look at the views. Well, it's a view of a car park. Oh no, but it's a lovely car park. Look at all the cars there. You're a big car fan, aren't you? Look, you can see. You know, and it was quite clear that there was a conflict of interest because they weren't giving advice to their clients. They were taking their own financial interests above the interests of their clients. Personal relationship. A personal relationship doesn't mean that you can't undertake the work. So a question that's often asked is, if you're asked to deal with an instruction by a family member, a spouse, a close friend, could you undertake it? The answer is yes, you can, but the advice that you give must be on a strict arm's length basis. In other words, treat that person, whether it's mum, dad, brother, sister, son, daughter, cousin, husband, wife, as a client, regardless of whether or not a fee is paid or received. Commercial relationships. Obligations to another commercial entity affects your ability to provide objective advice to a client. So let's think about this. You're a managing agent. There's a tender that's coming up, and you are let's say, for example, it's a security contract. You happen to be a shareholder, or a family member is the owner of a security company, and you make a recommendation that that company should be part of the tender, and you're pushing for that company to get the instruction. Why? Obviously, why? Because your impartiality. Because you are not being able to be impartial. Now, in the event that somebody else wanted that firm, that security company to which you have a personal interest, to be involved in the pitch, what you should do is step away from the selection process because there is a conflict of interest. If that company wins the instruction on merit, absolutely fine. And you can turn around and say, I was not involved in any way, shape or form in the selection of that company. So what should you do if you believe there is a conflict of interest? Firstly, you must be open and transparent and inform all parties of potential conflicts of interest. You should offer to stand down from the instruction if possible, or if necessary. And depending on the situation, a conflict of interest can be managed by, for example, having an information barrier. And this is what I was talking about when we were talking about the large firms, not mentioning any names: CBRE, BNP Paribas, Lambert Smith Hampton, etc., etc. Separate offices, separate support staff, separate files on computers, etc., etc. Okay, that is an information barrier, and that will help to overcome the potential conflicts of interest. Now, I just briefly touched upon this: personal interest, where you act as an agent for the sale or letting of property owned by yourself or by an associate, or in which you or your associate have an interest. then the relevant facts must be disclosed to any prospective purchaser or lessee, or if you've instructed one, their lawyer. It doesn't say you can't do it. It just says you have to disclose that there is a personal interest. The term relevant facts includes the nature and extent of the interest. Similarly, where you act as agent for the sale of personal property owned by yourself or your firm, then this must be disclosed to the prospective purchaser or representative. Personal interest in farm quota, I'm not sure this is relevant, and other rights linked to property could again require disclosure. So now we start to get to some of the sort of common questions that are asked. Setting up your own practice. What steps do you need to take when setting up your own practice? These will include, please learn these, informing the RICS and registering for regulation. Let me ask you a question, and you don't have to answer it, but just think about it. The rules have changed now. So it used to be that if more than 50% of the members or shareholders of a firm are qualified, you have to be regulated. Now it's 25%. Okay, so it's becoming more and more important to be regulated. And the question that was asked to a candidate was by me was, you know, if you went to join a practice, a bigger practice, where none of the other owners of the business were qualified, would you choose to be regulated? To which the answer was, no, probably not. This was in the interview. I kid you not. I said, you want to think about that again? No, probably not. Far too much red tape. Right. Okay. Okay. The answer, obviously, going back to what we said earlier about common sense, is that yes, absolutely. Of course, we'd be regulated. But the answer genuinely is exactly that, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to give the clients comfort, okay, that you are being regulated, okay, that you are being monitored, that you have a set of rules and regulations to follow. You will have professional indemnity insurance. Make sure you know the requirements based on turnover and the minimum levels of indemnities required, minimum level of cover required. You have a complaints handling officer. You set up appropriate procedures for handling clients' money, and you comply with statute. Now, one thing that is often overlooked is a locum. L-O-C-U-M. If you've got a piece of paper, please write it down, because it's often missed by quite a lot of people. A locum is somebody that is appointed by a sole practitioner, and only a sole practitioner, to deal with a business in the event that you are unable to work due to ill health or, dare I say it, death. So if you're a sole practitioner practicing as a chartered surveyor, it is a requirement. It is a requirement that you have a locum, that in the event that you are unable to carry on working, you can hand over the reins to somebody, and your clients know that their money, that their property, their insurance, their whatever is in safe hands. That is known as a locum, okay? And that catches a lot of people out, but it's actually very, very important. And what I said to you earlier about, you know, the importance of the rules of conduct. I'll be honest with you, you know, if you've done a perfect interview and all your rules of conduct questions are perfect, but you didn't know what a locum is, okay, I would not fail you on that. But if it's something you do know, then great. It's important. So we now come to gifts and hospitality. I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but just want to sort of go through it again with you. As with conflicts of interest, gifts and hospitality should not be accepted or offered if they are likely to compromise you or your firm's impartiality or integrity, or if this gives the impression of doing so. Okay, that impression is important. How would that be perceived in the market? Hospitality, promotional, or other business expenditure which seeks to genuinely promote and improve the image of your firm or organization in order to present its products and services is an acceptable and key part of doing business. So let's say, for example, you are invited to the opening of a shopping center and or an office block, and there's a whole group of people that are invited, obviously, and as a thank you, you are given a £50 TM Lewin voucher. Okay, is that permitted? Is that considered a gift, a hospitality? Is it a bribe? The answer is no, it isn't. Okay, it's not considered a bribe or hospitality because it's being offered to a wide range of people. Okay, it's being offered to a group, and therefore it couldn't be considered a bribe. If it was being offered just to you to get you down there, that's a different matter. But if it's not being offered to a group, then that's absolutely fine. And you would consider it to be proportional and so on and so forth. All right. Similarly, we talked about going to the test match and if a client took, had tickets or a box for the day, and they took their agent and their finance broker and their bank and their architect, and again, yes, that's absolutely fine. Okay, because it's a mixture of people. There's no direct suggestion of bribery. Openness and transparency is important, whether giving or receiving gifts or hospitality. You need to know what legal provisions apply, as well as what your firm's policy and procedures are, and follow those. It can be useful to ensure that new clients or business partners are aware of the professional and ethical standards that are obliged to meet. This may help to prevent you from being put in a difficult position at a later stage in your business relationship. So, some of you may deal with overseas clients. Some of those overseas clients, some of their business practices may be totally acceptable in their country, but not acceptable in this country. Remember that no matter where you work, no matter what country you work in, you adhere to the rules of conduct as defined by the RICS, okay? And they're the same across the world. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Australia or in Los Angeles or in Hong Kong or in Argentina, the same principles apply, even if that is beyond the local customs of that particular location. So in making a decision about whether to accept or provide gifts or hospitality, the following questions may provide a useful starting point. So ask yourself, so what's the value of it? How expensive is this? If it's really expensive, is it proportional? Probably not. Who's it being given to? Is it one person or a range of people from different organizations? This will enable you to determine whether or not you should actually be accepting it. Is the gift or hospitality reasonable and proportionate? Does it have a genuine business purpose? When is it being given? This is an important point. When is it being given? Is it in close proximity in time to a tender contract being awarded, or is it an event that happens on a fairly regular basis? So, let's just say, for example, there's a contractor that you work with, and you're a property manager, and they give you a bottle of wine or a hamper from wherever, Harrods, at Christmas. Is that acceptable? Probably yes, because it's a Christmas gift. It's not done. It's a regular occurrence. It's reciprocal. It's proportional, etc., etc. But if you were to receive that gift from a contractor for whom you do not have a business relationship with, and it's at a time perhaps they've just pitched for a contract with your organization, then you would have to then decline it. And ask yourself, how easy or difficult is it when offering the gift of hospitality to decline it there and then? Normally, the more difficult it is, the less likely it is that you should be receiving it. And that, my friends, is the rules of conduct and ethics. So I'm going to invite you to open your microphones if you have any questions. And please feel free just to shout them out or type them into the chat box if you don't want to have your voice on the screen. But hopefully you found that quite useful. And as I said, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Okay, so the question is, what's the answer to the example where the Birmingham? Okay, so in that case, what should happen is that ethically, you're not permitted to act for both sides. So it doesn't matter whether you've got, an information barrier or not. Let's just say, for example, that it's CBRE. CBRE would be billing, the company. So in that case, the best thing to do would be to bring in a joint agent to act for that, to act for one of those clients, either the selling agent or the buying agent, and to step away and allow them to undertake the instruction, perhaps for a share of the fees or whatever. If a friend approaches you informally asking for free advice, etc., are there any guidelines on that? There aren't specific guidelines, other than to say that it's quite a common question and quite a common consideration. The point is that just because it's a friend doesn't mean that you don't classify them as a client. Just because you're giving free advice doesn't mean you can't be sued. So you're entitled to give your friend free advice. However, the recommendation is that you should be as professional as possible, that you should invite the friends to your office. They should, in theory, sign terms of engagement. You should have professional indemnity insurance to cover the advice that you're giving your friend. And then you're free to undertake the instruction. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. Any other questions?
Hi Mark, I've got a question on the bribery stuff. I've got an example of a gift in my submissions. Can I just say, if I get asked a question, that obviously I understand that the Bribery Act and my firm's gift policy, but then and the whole proportionality and reasonableness of the gift, but regardless of that, I just didn't think it was appropriate that obviously clients are offering gifts regardless of the time of year. Can I just say that I declined based on my personal preference?
Yes. So one of the things which I didn't mention, which I do believe is still valid, is the sort of the common sense approach, which is, if in doubt, just say no. Would you accept this? Would you do this? No, I wouldn't. Yeah, but what happens if, and the answer is, I wouldn't accept it. I wouldn't feel comfortable. I would politely decline it. You can't be wrong for declining the offer of hospitality or a gift or something else. And I'll give you an example. I used to do some work with Lambert Smith Hampton, and they acted for the Metropolitan Police. And perhaps surprisingly, the Metropolitan Police were very, very keen to ensure that there was no suggestion of any kind of bribery. And as a result of that, whenever the agents from Lambert Smith Hampton went to wherever they went to see the clients, they weren't even allowed to offer them a cup of coffee or tea, because that might be considered as a bribe. Similarly, if they went to Lambert Smith Hampton's offices in London, they weren't even allowed to accept the offer of a cup of tea or coffee. So in the event that you were to be asked something, you're really not sure, just say no. Vicky asked, do we have any more examples of scenario-based questions? Yeah, I'm going to send out a full pack of questions, including rules of conduct and ethics, which will be scenario-based questions. Let me just make a note of that so I can do that for you later on. Right, Martina, when will you cover? Okay, so yeah, I need to do, I'm going to do that next week, Martina. What I'll do is I'll send a note round for those of you that I'm not aware. I'm just going to be doing an extra webcast on development appraisal with some strategic real estate and some property records. It may not be relevant to you guys if you're not doing those competencies, but I'm going to try and sort of squeeze it in, and I'll send an invite round to everybody. You know, feel free to come along for a bit of extra tuition. So I will do that. Let me just check the diary. Where are we now? Wednesday. So yeah, next week's looking a bit better. So it'll be at some point early part of next week. And measurement too, yes. Yeah, and I will be doing measurement as well, because somebody else has asked me for a measurement update as well. So I'll do that. I'll probably wrap it into one session and do the first bit being development appraisal, strategic real estate, and data management, and then measurement in part 2. All right, so I'll get that organised for you. No problems. If you don't hear from me, because I've got to go out this afternoon, if you don't hear from me about that, will you just, Martin, will you just remind me so that I can get it organised tonight? The scenario questions, some of them do have answers, yes. Some of them don't. So you might need to just think about that. What's the relevance of turnover for PII levels? Why is it based on turnover? The honest answer is, Megan, I don't know. I don't know why it's based on turnover. I guess that if you think about it, companies with if you look at profits, don't necessarily correlate with turnover. So you can have a very high turnover, but actually make a very small profit. But in terms of the actual fee income that's coming in, that could be quite high. So therefore, you need to have the appropriate PII levels, but your profit, it may be negative. You know, you may be making a loss. So that, you know, if you're making a loss, doesn't mean you don't need professional indemnity insurance. So that's why I believe it's based on turnover. Are there any other questions that I've missed?
Oh, sorry, Mark, I've got one more question. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So I've seen this on a couple of mocks and things, and depending on sort of different answers, but in terms of when asked what are the rules of conduct for firms, I've heard either people I always go down the sort of the 9 rules, but then obviously the rules of conduct for firms also includes the rules for administration, is it? So you've got your advertising, logo, designation, and all of that. So are you expecting us to say there's, say, 15 rules of conduct for firms, or do you just want the first part?
Well, I tend not to ask about the rules of conduct for firms, and not many people do, in truth. But the rules of conduct for firms are split into 3 different sections. So you've got the first bit, which is the accountability and proportionality and all that sort of thing, and then you've got the second bit, which is the designation, using the logo and advertising and all that sort of thing. So the answer to that is, like anything else, give as much detail as you can, unless they tell you otherwise. So if you know it, then you know, give the give the answer. Any other questions? Okay, all right. Well, if there are no other questions, I hope that was useful. As I said, I'll be doing some measurements and some other bits and pieces, development appraisals and strategic real estate and data management next week. So we've got some mocks coming up. Just on that point, actually, some of you have got your interviews coming up. I'm intending to invite some other people to listen in to the mocks. Okay. First of all, could you please let me know if you would like to dial in and listen to somebody else's mock? And of course, you'd be muted, so you wouldn't be able to contribute. So please let me know if you'd like to do that. But also, if you have any objections to somebody dialing in, you won't know that they're there because obviously we're going to be doing it like this. They won't have their video or anything. But it's quite a good way of hearing questions, you know, that other people are asked. So if you have any objections, so for example, I won't ask you now, but just let me know privately. So for example, Megan, you're Thursday, sorry. Alicia, I'm not sure if you're on this call, but you're tomorrow. Yeah, Megan, you're Thursday. Sarah, you're Thursday. And then Ali, I think you've left, but you're Monday. And Ellie, you're next Wednesday. So if you guys, as I said, have any objections, please let me know. If not, I'll invite others to listen in. Right, ladies and gents, good session. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. I'm going to send you these notes. So I've worked out how to now send them by WeTransfer. Hopefully that's all worked out fine. Any problems, give me a shout. You know where I am. I'm going out this afternoon. Don't tell anyone. It's nothing exciting, but so I'm going to be in the car. But as I said, call me if you need me. Right, let's stop recording.